This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, as always.
For the show today, we've got a great show for you today with Kyler and I. We've got some hot topics to start the conversation. Those hot topics are going to range from AI and hardware chips. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence in hardware chips. We're going to talk about capital being raised for clean energy. We're going to talk about digital enforcement versus digital inclusion. I have no idea where that part of the conversation is going to go, so I'm going to learn along with the audience on that one for sure. And then we're going to talk about emergence of cryptocurrency in the Philippines. And then finally, last but not least, in the hot topic segment, we will cover the 4 types of business transformation. And then last but not least, we'll have a panel discussion later in the show. We're going to have a panel discussion talking about our 2023 Digital Transformation Report, which was just released a few weeks ago, something you can download on our website. I've also included links to that Digital Transformation Report in the notes of this podcast, so be sure to check that out. So we had a panel discussion, really talk about some of the findings and lessons from that Digital Transformation Report, which is an annual report that we publish each year. Excuse me. And so that's going to be the last segment for today. But before we get to the other guests on the show, Kyler, what about these hot topics? What have you got for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about today's hot topics because I think there's a lot of emerging technologies in it, as well as some really granular case studies that we'll talk through, which will set up the conversation nicely for going into one of the biggest failures in digital transformation history that we've seen. So the first thing I want to start with is AI, specifically in retina technology, and talk through what that means for that 1-inch chip device. So here in the United States at the University of Central Florida, the researchers there have built a device for artificial intelligence that replicates the retina of an eye. So if you lost an eye in an accident or even want to enhance your vision, hundreds of devices are fitting into this really small 1-inch chip that is a really compact technology, which is a little bit different that we've seen in a lot of autonomous or AI-based technologies, such as self-driving vehicles. So this is a kind of a big movement in that field on the hardware side. So basically, what it has the capacity to do in sensor type of computing using a single device on one small platform, as opposed to multiple devices or technologies on multi-tenant platforms. So my question for you that I found kind of interesting is this device has about 70 to 80% accuracy in its infancy, which means it could be really realized as a substantial piece of hardware and moving forward. So we've moved to wearables. We've kind of gone into, a healthcare based technologies as well. So my question to you on a surface level is, would you put an eye in your body that can see 70 to 80% of the time?
Um, I don't know. It depends on who has access to it and
Right.
what they do with that information, I suppose. I don't think I would right now, to be honest, but
Yeah.
but I could see the benefit of it for sure. I just don't trust. I don't trust that process right now in the world we live in, to be honest.
Absolutely. I think, in all seriousness, the evolution of that chip-based technology, which we know has been a real hot topic and hot trend in the industry of figuring out how to manufacture this. So something I'd love our audience feedback on is: do you think that manufacturing this one small chip in domestically wherever you are in the world could actually be something that could function within the supply chain? So Eric, I'll ask that to you first, and then audience, I'd love your feedback in the comments on wherever you're watching.
And you did say that question again. What would work in the supply chain?
Yeah, this really small device in manufacturing domestically. So could we actually get it to consumers quickly, as opposed to the challenges we have with chip manufacturing and supply chain in our current climate?
Well, I suppose we have to figure that out because as we've talked about in this show before, chip manufacturing shortages is creating a lot of problems for producers and manufacturers throughout the world, including in the United States and other countries. So I think just having an integrated supply chain with reliable raw material manufacturers is critical. I don't know if the infrastructure is there yet to support that. I just don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I feel like that's something. I think our current supply chain and some of the dependencies on certain vendors in certain parts of the world, that's going to have to change in order for that to be a reliable process, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to our next hot topic when we talk about a reliable or a mature supply chain. It's sort of a follow up to what we talked about clean energy or different access to new energy technologies when it comes to a supply chain or just overall emerging research. So this week, Google and Chevron both announced that they were part of a 250 million fundraising round for TEA Technologies, which is basically a nuclear fusion startup. And it raised in total, outside of these big industry titans for both technology and energy, 1.2 billion in this round. So obviously, the current inflation or move to clean energy is raising these kind of startup capital funding or even private equity funding that we see a lot in our client partners. So for those of you that don't know what nuclear fusion is, because I didn't when I started this research, it's often referred to as quote unquote the holy grail of clean energy because it's generating nearly unlimited emission-free energy. So we talked about kind of that movement and the fear of that timeline. But basically, it's without harmful toxins to the environment, and it's long-lasting radioactive waste that it produces. Excuse me. The challenge with this, and what I kind of want to unpack with you as far as questioning, is it needs to be stored at a very high temperature and can be, very challenging and dangerous to move, which we see with fuels like oil and gas now. So as someone who's worked in that oil and gas field, do you feel like there are systems in place when it comes to ERP, supply chain management systems that can support this emerging science when it comes to clean energy?
I do. I think the technology is getting there as far as being able to support that. Certainly from a safety, compliance, and distribution, and just managing the entire supply chain network of that entire process. There are technologies there, but it's a pretty complex space. I mean, energy in general, not just clean energy, but any sort of energy production and distribution is pretty complex, just given all the moving parts that go into that. So it's definitely more challenging, and the technology is oftentimes strained by some of those complexities, but there are technologies out there that can handle that. I don't know if ERP systems per se are the best option, because ERP systems are generally fully integrated, trying to be everything to everyone across an organization. And what we see oftentimes in the energy space, including clean energy, is that ERP systems lack some of those capabilities that are unique to energy producers. So a lot of times you have to look at more of a best of breed point solution sort of option for energy utility companies as well.
And I know, Eric, you and team work in kind of these new industry spaces, whether we're looking at aerospace, clean energy, cannabis, these newer industries that are coming out with new technologies. So what is your approach when you go into a specific industry that might be newer to standardized processes, or looking at a bigger system that they need support because of this high growth marketplace?
Well, first of all, we look at what sorts of technologies are out there for a particular organization that specializes in their industry. You mentioned cannabis. Cannabis has an emerging class of technologies that are ERP systems, but they're tailored and focused on cannabis production, which has some pretty unique business processes that are similar to food and beverage production, but different. It's sort of a variance of that core capability. Within energy too, as we talked about, that's another thing we look at, is if you can't find a single ERP system, or there aren't any sorts of technologies out there that on their own can handle a broad variety of capabilities for an organization, then that's where you look to multiple point solutions like separate financials and supply chain management and mobile workforce management, outage management for energy companies, that sort of thing. So that's just the way we go about it, is you have to look at the technological landscape, the limitations and options available within your particular vertical, and then figure out, what roadmap makes the most sense for your organization.
Yeah, and it sounds like having kind of that third-party blueprint or that business advocate that specializes in kind of in the system space might be a really good first step to kind of engage that expert, especially if you are kind of in an emerging industry. So definitely some great points there.
Yeah, you want that agnostic view, which is really the important point in what you just said. You want that technology agnostic, objective view of what are our options, what are the trade-offs, what's the best one for us, and which one best supports what it is we're trying to accomplish. So just getting less of the sales speak and the sales pitch from software vendors, and really getting an agnostic view can be super helpful.
Well, absolutely. And that innovation, I think that's what the team here at Third Stage really brings to the table, is these processes may not be established in the industry yet. So having that ability and that entrepreneurial spark when you are evaluating these processes is one of my favorite part about the team here at Third Stage, is they are passionate about helping our clients establish what's best for them, right? Not what's best for the software that's in the marketplace right now.
Yep, I agree.
Well, let's go across the world to our friends in New Zealand, in our APAC area. So there's this interesting new study by the Citizens Advice Bureau, which is a government entity, that talks about digital enforcement versus digital inclusion. And their argument is access to public services, specifically within a public space or governmental entities, is a human right. And by implication of the move to more of a digital space for public services specifically, they aren't universally inclusive to the access, and it might deprive some people of that right. So a really interesting kind of argument by this public service group that talks about the non-proficient technologist. So very stereotypically, and not always, but that tends to be, our older base of consumers when it comes to things like accessing motor vehicle records or things like that that have moved to a fully digital environment and interaction. So I wondered what you would say to these specific public service sectors moving to a fully digital environment and how that might limit the access to a non-digital native consumer or constituent in this point.
Well, it certainly does exclude certain demographics, like you mentioned. It reminds me of the whole debate that we're seeing in the United States. I'm not sure if it's something that is prevalent in other parts of the world where we have offices as well. But one thing I've noticed is in the U.S., for example, there's a debate politically about whether or not people have a right to high-speed Wi-Fi and a right to high-speed internet, especially if you live in a rural area or if you just can't afford internet. Should the government be providing that sort of accessibility that others might have? And so it's sort of along those same veins, I suppose, that we're talking about here, as far as how you include more people. It seems like, this is my opinion, but I'll be totally honest. I'll add a caveat that this is a biased view just from my bubble or my, wherever my place in life. But, it seems like that over time, as the internet becomes more and more prevalent, technology costs come down, it's becoming more accessible already to a wider population. And the population is, for those that haven't already adapted to a digital world, they're slowly getting there. So I almost feel like it's I don't know if it's a government thing that the government has to fix, or a regulatory issue that needs to be fixed, or if it's more of a change management issue, how to get people on board. Now, having said that, I don't know how to address in the short term, how to address the economic or the financial exclusion that might come along with not being able to afford the internet or not being able to afford accessibility. But I still think that's becoming less and less common, because even in developing parts of the world, and even in populations where you would think they wouldn't have the money or the resources to access the internet. They all have mobile phones. There's an extremely high adoption rate of mobile technology, even in developing parts of the world. So I feel like we're getting there. I don't know, I have no idea if government regulatory relief will help or not. But I feel like we're kind of headed that way. The undercurrent's definitely heading that way anyway. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you missed that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings, and the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Bad to the bone.
And what would you say, this makes me think at least about digital adoption platforms. And really that seems to me kind of as that bridge from going to a full digital environment, because I feel like that's inevitable at this point, right? But what would you say about using a tool set like that to give this human right, or teach it and train to?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it could just be an adoption thing, like you said. Like if there's if there's some sort of registration you need to do with a regulatory body in whatever part of the world you're in, is there an app you go to? Is there a website? Even just knowing how to go about it, I think that's probably the bigger issue. Again, this could be biased, it could be inaccurate, but I don't get the sense that in the world there's a lot of inaccessibility to the internet and to digital technologies in general. Now, certainly there's a a financial burden that is high for some if you're getting into advanced technologies. But if you're talking just access the internet to register whatever permit or whatever regulation you need to register for, I feel like most of the world has that access. It's just more a matter of, do they know where to go and how to go about it? It's not like, I suppose it's a bit of a jump to look back to when you could just look up, where is the local office that I need to go to, and I'm just going to physically go there, and someone's going to tell me what I need to do and help me through the process. Now it's a matter of, well, you're not going to physically go there. You're going to get on your phone and go to whatever website, and someone in a chat bot or whatever is going to help you through the process. So I think you're right that digital adoption technology and the whole process behind that could be a good way to enable that. And I think that would be more effective, quite frankly, than trying to force it through regulation or government intervention, which I know is not what you're suggesting. I think I'm just, I'll try not to head down the path of regulation. We've covered that a lot in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it might be that is the regulation, right? If you're going to provide these service in 100% digital environment or ecosystem, then you need to have some sort of adoption plan or platform to your change management point. Absolutely. So 100%. So let's keep going throughout the world in our global conversation today. Really interesting new development in the Philippines. And the Philippines, I'm not sure if you know, or I didn't, that it's really become one of the newest crypto hubs as well. And I think this is a really interesting conversation about connectivity and access when the government is actually leading that charge, right? So in a newly released survey, the Philippines ranked 10th in cryptocurrency adoption by country, with over 11.6 million Filipinos owning digital assets. So that's a pretty staggering statistic in my mind. So they have actually, the government's Department of Science and Technology has started a blockchain training program for researchers in this department to continue to solidify their leading in this industry. So they focus on blockchain in areas such as healthcare, financial support, emergency aid, insurance of passports and visa, trademark registration, government records, and among others. And their goal for this is to bring those financial services to rural households and other segments that are underserved by the current banking system. So I thought that this was a really interesting kind of almost complete opposite approach as that New Zealand more trying to bring in that inclusivity. The government here is leading that training program and continuing to move forward to be a leader in that cryptocurrency sphere, not to mention the private businesses there that are raising a ton of capital and moving into that cryptocurrency behavior for consumers. So just wanted to get your kind of opposite take on this story when it comes to how the Philippines is approaching new technology as opposed to how New Zealand, not good or bad, but just different, right?
Well, I'll tell you what I think if it's good or bad.
Okay,
even though I don't want me to.
I'm just trying to not box you in there, but by all means, go for it.
No, I'm kidding. I don't think it's good or bad. Well, I think it's interesting for sure, because I think it seems like there's different schools of thought. And the one I've heard more often is the opposite school of thought, which is government entities trying to get more involved in regulating and clamping down on the use of cryptocurrency. I guess the biggest question I have that sort of leaves me on the fence with this whole topic is, I think on one hand, it's great that people have an option now. They don't have to rely on a federal currency that they might not have control over, especially in today's day and age where you've got inflation and exchange rates are just really weird right now and out of balance with different with inflation and governments printing money and that sort of thing. That's creating a lot of spending power that's being diminished and it's outside of your control. Whereas cryptocurrency, it seems like people feel like they have more control. Whether or not they actually do, I think it's a different debate. But I think there's a good subset of the population that values that. But I guess the question is that, if there isn't a regulatory body that somehow manages exchange rates and just overall inflation and things like that, like the central banks throughout the world do, Does it, first of all, does it need to be? Is it okay that we have an alternate currency that doesn't have that? And second of all, does that affect the adoption rate? Would more people be more likely to adopt cryptocurrency if there was some sort of perception that the government was somehow helping? And so I don't know. I have mixed feelings on that, but I think it's super interesting. I'd be curious to see how the Philippines, the adoption rate and just sort of the use of crypto and the effect on their standard of living and their purchasing power and all that stuff. I'll be curious to see over time how that compares to other parts of the world that are sort of trying to clamp down and tax and regulate cryptocurrency. And, what do those two scenarios look like and how does that affect the adoption and that sort of thing? So I definitely have a lot more questions than strong opinions on this topic.
Yeah, it is really complex, right? For example, I tried to sell a bed frame on Facebook Marketplace and the hackers in Facebook were trying to upgrade me to Zelle and get all of that information. And it was like a full-fledged huge attack of like 10 or 15 people or fake profiles trying to do that. So when we look at things like cryptocurrency or even money-based applications that integrate with your bank account, it does really bring up this new cybersecurity threat. So it will be interesting to see how they kind of combat that and still grow as a forefront of that marketplace. But I think it's overall great, that forward thinking of technology. It just needs to come with some sort of overall safety plan, really full baked.
Yeah, and we've talked before too, like the metaverse too. I think a couple episodes ago we talked about the dark side, or it wasn't the dark side of the metaverse, but we were talking about safety in the metaverse. I think it was a couple episodes ago. And does it need to be regulated? And how do you make sure that people aren't getting ripped off in the metaverse and that sort of thing? So I don't know. It's sort of like right now, a lot of this stuff, metaverse, cryptocurrency, it's sort of like the wild, wild west of the U.S. back in the day when, there were just people doing whatever they wanted. There wasn't a whole lot of regulation or governmental influence. So that's kind of like where it is right now in some of these digital spaces. But you have to think that inevitably, whether you like it or not, there's going to be more government regulation and involvement in those areas. But in the meantime, what do you do? How do you avoid some of those challenges? I guess that's the big question.
Absolutely. I think I just came up with my new buzzword for the month. It's digital bandit. Thinking about the Wild West. And
I'm going to start calling you that, actually. I'm going to start accusing you of being a digital bandit. And you will,
all right. Well, that's not where I thought that conversation was going to go, but here we are. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to own the digital bandit space.
Like when you put me on the spot, I'm going to say, stop asking me these difficult questions, you digital bandit. Even though that doesn't make any sense, it still has some ring to it.
Absolutely. I like it. I'm going to own it. Absolutely. So the last case studies, multiple, I want to jump to today on Hot Topics is a recent research done by the Harvard Business Review here in the United States. And it focuses on global companies and why they go through a business transformation, which we know a digital transformation is essentially a business transformation. We often refer to it that way instead of a digital transformation. So due to their research, they have 4 types that are influenced by initiators, both internal and external, and pace. How fast are you going through this transformation? And a lot of this new research is from the COVID-19 era. As we know, an initiator became a lot of external factors in how you can do business. So the 4 types that we're going to talk about today are negotiated transformation, hijacked transformation, slow motion transformation, and sprinted transformation. And I'm going to take you through some real life examples of each one. And then we can kind of talk through what that looks like that you're seeing in the marketplace. And if you feel like you would add anything to those 4 buckets or change them in any way. So let's first talk about a slow motion transformation. This is a company that's very intentional, but sometimes gets caught in that analysis paralysis phase that we see a lot. So I think it's called Maersk Line. It's a Danish container shipping firm. Basically, they wanted more visibility and transparency to their customer supply chain that required organizational technical and cultural change. So this was a significant investment, as it always is. It started in 2016 and still is an ongoing dialogue about the company's strategic positioning and corporate identity. So basically, it's created a rift of, are they a tech company and they're focusing on this new technology, or are they first and foremost a shipping container company? So kind of an identity crisis that's put a pause on their transformation and really drug it out for a while. Now we're in 2022. It's obviously been 6 years since they started this, and what that looks like. So now let's go to a sprinted transformation. We're actually going to talk about Meta, which we talked about in our conversation about the metaverse. So in October 2021, Mark Zuckerberg, who is obviously the CEO and founder of Meta, did a sweeping and really unprecedented transformation for the almost 70,000 person workforce for this social networking company. So all of a sudden, they told their Instagram and Facebook engineers to forget their goals for 2022 and instead reapply for new positions in augmented reality and virtual reality. This sprinted transformation created a lot of uncertainty and stress that we've seen with former employees, but it could also be argued that it was a huge competitive advantage for them to gain metaverse real estate before their bigger tech competitors. So sprinted transformation. Now we're going to talk about negotiated transformation. We're going to focus on the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. Very big name. We call it the GDPR, right? We all know what that means. So basically, these requirements were passed in 2016 to all businesses that are operating in the EU, which we do, and we apply by these compliance all the time. However, they didn't go into effect for several years. So while the legislation what has been arguably and sometimes unclear that they need further clarification and interpretation along the way. And these forms were forced to transform because of their operating procedures. So they had no other choice than to go through this because of the negotiated transformation of their constituents and their legislator, right?
Right.
Lastly, and I hope you're taking notes. No,
I am actually.
This one is a bit more straightforward. So this is a hijacked transformation. So this is going to focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In a matter of days, right, companies had to leave or end their Russian operations because of sanctions, boycotts, or political repercussions. So these hijacked transformations can occur when there's new disruptive competitors entering the industry and kind of change the rules of the game, if you will. They also reference streaming companies, this research. So we're talking about Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus. They've threatened that conventional telecom, TV flow, cinemas, movies industries, thus kind of hijacking their business and making their transformation agendas completely flip. So those are the 4 types. And the reason I took some more time to go through these is I really think they're very interesting when it comes to why, that purpose behind a business or digital transformation. So really excited to hear kind of your feedback on these 4 different types.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I would love to read that article, by the way. I think that's...
I'll link it for our audience to the research. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think what 2 things jumped out at me. One is that there is oftentimes, it seems like there would be a lot of overlap, or sort of like you could be in any one of those 4 categories depending on how you look at it. So there's some similarities or some merit that most organizations might find in multiple sets of those 4. But the more important thing, the second thing, and the more important thing is that I think as you were describing those, I was thinking, none of these 4 I think are good or bad, but just making sure that it fits your industry and your situation, and that you manage the transformation accordingly is really important. Because I could see, for example, the slow motion one, the shipping company, the first one you talked about, I could see how that maybe that started as a sprinted or more of a negotiated sort of a model, but then they end up in the slow motion camp because they're trying to figure out what they want to be and
Mhm.
what is their business model. Are they really a shipping company? Are they a tech company, like you said? So I think just having that self-awareness of what fits you best and being comfortable with that and saying, okay, we're going to manage it as a slow motion initiative rather than, a
Mhm.
sprint. I think that's important. Too often we see companies that think they're going to do more of like the sprinted approach, but
Mhm.
they're an old school company that's slow to change and they're not going to sprint. The reality is it's like a marathon or someone who wants to become a marathon runner or a sprinter, but you've never run before, but you assume you're just going to be a good sprinter. That doesn't typically work out that way. And I hate running, so I don't know why I'm even using that analogy, but anyway, so I think those are the two main things that come to mind as it relates to it. But I think having that awareness and the deliberate strategy to support whatever camp or whatever bucket you fall in is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish I had a bat phone which actually I'll tell you, bat phone is something that one of our clients asked for this week to Eric. So that's where I got that saying. So I wish
Wait,
I
they
had
asked for a bat phone?
yeah, because they want to, be able to reach you. They're big
Oh,
fans, as everyone is. And Eric is accessible. You don't need a bat phone when you do
although
work.
I,
But
I'd be
it would
happy to
be kind
sell
of
my
cool. Yeah.
to to sell for a price my cell phone number. I mean, I'm happy if someone wants to pay me to to have
Absolutely.
my phone number. That's fine.
Absolutely, definitely. But I digress. So a bat phone to Mark Zuckerberg I really want to know, like, is that worth it? Is that level of shifting your overall strategy, just saying, forget what you know, and causing this huge disruption in an already really disrupted industry? I wonder to those executives, is that worth it? And maybe it is. I have no idea, right? But that's one thing that really stood out to me when we come to there's a difference between that hijacked and that sprint, right? Hijacked, they don't have a choice. They have to do that to stay in business. Sprinted is they see kind of that competitive advantage to sprint in, own that space. And I just am so curious to see, like, is that really worth it? And I wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, and that Facebook was or Meta was the one that you mentioned with that, or that the article mentioned, because I do wonder. You look at big companies. This is a little bit of a tangent, but when you look at big companies like Facebook, even in the tech space, that was a pretty bold move for them to say, we are totally changing our business model. We're so into this concept of the metaverse, and we think it's so important in our future. We're going to actually rename our company. I mean, so he's all in on this whole metaverse thing, which is pretty unique for any company to do, but especially a big company. But there's part of me, and I'm sure maybe there's part of Mark Zuckerberg that wonders this too. That wonders, is that really a smart move? Is the metaverse going to be a thing, or is it sort of like we're doubling down on vinyl records back in the
Mhm.
80s, right as companies were still using, or right as people were still using vinyl, but they're starting to switch to cassettes and CDs and other digital streaming stuff that would come later. It just makes you wonder, is metaverse sort of a blip, just a tiny little blip in the overall history of technology, and is that the right move? But that's a whole different story. But I think the key is, like, make sure you're sprinting only if it makes sense, and if you're like I said, if you're an old school organization, yes, you probably need to change, but maybe you don't need to sprint and double down in the way that Facebook doubled down on the metaverse. But if we saw during the pandemic, for example, that all these companies were forced into these sprinted transformations because they didn't have the technology to support a remote work environment, or even more commonly, they were in an industry like retail or distribution, any supply chain intensive organization, food and beverage production. Those are examples of industries that were severely disrupted by the
Mhm.
pandemic, and they were sort of forced into this whole sprinted um, approach. Although I guess, would that be considered a sprint, or is that a hijack? If
No, so
you're
that would be the hijack. And that's
okay,
why I like to distinguish between the two, because there are some companies that literally had zero choice. It was either go out of business or figure out how to do this. But
mhm,
Meta is they didn't have to do that, right?
yeah,
They did it because they think that it's a good business decision. However, I wonder if the disruption, because I wish I could have been a fly on the wall. We know software engineers, right? We know platform engineers, and to tell that type of workforce that, hey, you're doing something completely different, would have been a very interesting conversation. Like, it's one thing to be in the creative branding side. Like, we always react to the marketplace, but software engineers, they're not always, at least, and again, totally stereotypically, that's not something that usually we see success with, that really harsh change behind that group of technical workforce.
Yeah. Super interesting, though. Very interesting. Distinguishment. That's not a word. I just made that up, but it is very interesting to distinguish
like very
between
fancy. So we could go there. This is a very distinguished conversation for a British audience, right? And I won't even fake a British accent because that would just be embarrassing for Third Stage and myself.
Right,
but
and I can barely speak just American English, let alone British English or any other language. So I'm going to keep it simple for now.
Right, but thanks for upping the class level of that story. I really appreciate that.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 78. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. And Kyler, you recently had a chance to facilitate a discussion with several of our leaders at Third Stage Consulting to talk about our 2023 digital transformation report. So you had a chance to have this panel discussion with myself, with Wayne Holtham, who was just on a moment ago, the head of our Third Stage Consulting office in Asia Pacific, as well as Clifford Martin, who is the head of our EMEA office, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He's based out of Africa, but he covers that entire region. And so it was a good conversation that we thought we'd play a clip for. So let's go ahead and play this clip of the panel discussion. We'll uncover some of the themes and lessons from our 2023 digital transformation report.
First, let's do some quick introductions, and I'm going to start with the newest member of our team, who is not new to the digital transformation space in general. He brings a wealth of experience, but newer to our Third Stage team. So Greg Benton is our Chief Strategy Officer, and he is joining us from our Denver, United States office today. So Greg, if you wouldn't mind, we'll do a quick round robin of introductions about your role here at Third Stage and just some brief experience you have in the digital transformation space.
Greg Benton, great to be with you today, this afternoon, this morning. And I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at Third Stage. As Kyler said, I've been involved in digital transformation, ERP implementation, remediation, a lot of work over the last 25 years. And I'm responsible for the overall strategy, the solution development here at Third Stage, and very happy to be with you with the release of our report this morning.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. And then we will go in order. So Clifford Martin represents our EMEA team. So Clifford, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick intro, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Carla, and great to be here. It's a fantastic, very comprehensive, insightful report. So looking forward to unpacking it with the team, and of course with the some of the attendees. Clifford Martin, Managing Director for Third Stage, based in Cape Town, on the EMEA side of the world. And I've been involved in digital transformation over many decades, as I think is evident from the grey hair, and in a number of different roles, which I think is always interesting. So both as leading and managing large, complex transformation projects, as well as consulting for organizations like Gartner, KPMG, EY. And then the last 2 years or so, very much enjoying the position here at Third Stage and working with our African Middle East clients. Thank you, Carla.
Excellent. Thanks, Clifford. And then we will go to, and I'd like to point out, Wayne, that most of our users here are from Australia so far. So they're getting the gold star because they really got the short end of the stick on the time zone. So thank you to all of our Aussies out there. And Wayne, I'll pass it to you for an introduction to our APAC region.
Yeah, hi, I'm Wayne Holtham. I'm the Vice President for Third Stage Consulting in the APAC region, so Australia and the rest of Asia. Like Clifford, I've been around in digital transformations for a number of years, whether it be delivering, whether it be training, coaching, whether it be process development. I've had a fairly good, experience with all of those sort of areas. I noticed Sonny's from Melbourne as well, so he's enjoying the late night. So thank you, Sonny, for tuning in.
Yes, thank you for joining us on this this beautiful Australia evening, even though I hear you're freezing down there. So and then last but certainly not least, and doesn't really need an introduction, we have Eric Kimberling. So I'll pass it to Eric. I don't know, Eric, the last time you actually introduced yourself on one of these. So we'll let you do that real quick.
I know. Now I don't know what to say for my intro. No, my name's Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage, and I've been doing digital transformation stuff now for about 25 years. Started off as a change management consultant early in my career, and over the years expanded into software selection, implementation, project management, process improvement, more change management, that sort of thing. So, and most of that experience base has been across different platforms in a technology agnostic way. So it's a bit about my background.
Excellent. Well, let's get into it. Again, our 2023 Digital Transformation Report is released live on our website, in the description here and wherever you're watching. But I want to get into kind of a baseline of unpacking. So what I'm hoping to do first is define digital transformation. And then there's a lot of talk around our industry of what is digital transformation? Is it a buzzword, or is it an actual important business tactic? So our first assignment for our panelists is to define digital transformation in 4 words or less. So I feel like who's going to be best at this is Clifford. So Clifford, I'm going to go to you first. And put you on the spot there. So digital transformation, 4 words or less.
Well, 4 words or less, it depends. We may have a difference of opinion on spelling over here. It might be 5 words from you where you come from, 4 words from where I come from. Let's see. Okay. So I would define it as technology-enabled business role redesign. Is that 4 or 5 words, Carla? We can debate that one later on.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I think fundamentally important, it is a redesign of the business model, and it has to be. And if we go back to the very simplistic and quite catchy digital transformation phrase, I really do believe it's more about the transformation and what does that really mean. And too often, I think we fall into the trap of doing optimization. So we drive out efficiencies in terms of our standard business processes, and you can do that with legacy ERP. That's not particularly different or new, or doesn't give you any specific great advantage. So I do think it is about using technology, and it's about utilizing technology to change the business model. And what I mean by the business model, to essentially change how we create value and how the different products and services we create, how we engage with our customers, and how we define that type of value. So one has to, I think, if it's going to fit the classification of digital transformation, I do believe you have to be fundamentally changing your business model. Your products and services you deliver, the channels you engage with customers, and how you define such value for the organization. Fundamentally important.
Yeah, very, very good. And Eric, you talk a lot about business transformation. Clifford talked about kind of the digital side and the technology. Is digital transformation truly a business transformation, or can you build on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're doing it right, I think it is. And, every company has different needs and priorities. And certainly every organization has the technological debt that they're trying to satisfy or address as part of their upgrades of technology and modernization of technology. But to do that alone, just in the context of only focusing on technology and not focusing on how are we going to materially improve our business, improve the business model, demonstrate a solid ROI, that's the part that's often missing. So I think that's the business piece that really has to sort of lead the charge when it comes to a transformation.
And Wayne, how do you establish that ROI or that business value around a digital transformation, kind of more of those solid metrics of measurement?
It's interesting because I think, as Clifford mentioned, the key thing is to be able to get a business model, operating principles that actually determine where's the value in your business. And then as you actually start to map that out, you start to see what the benefits will be by making those changes and adopting those new practices. And that's where the value and efficiency comes back out for the organization. That's where we call benefits realization, I guess. It's that ability to be able to realize those after we've planned and we've defined and then we've made the change, and then we can see what we're achieving.
Yeah, really well said. That benefits realization really starts with a strong strategy. And Greg, you've taught us a lot about what phase 0 means in a digital transformation. Can you talk to our audience about how important that is to set for success?
Yeah, when you're looking at preparing an organization for digital transformation, you have to really look at both all of the 3 pillars: people, process, and technology. It's not just a technology decision about the direction you're going. If I were to define digital transformation in 3 words, it would be unified enterprise operations. So you have to make sure that your organization, from the executive level all the way through everyone that works in the organization, is on board with the same go forward strategy, and that you have the organization prepared from a data standpoint, data cleansing, preparation for the new technology. And then you have to make a decision about what are your objectives for the end goals or the end state of your transformed operations, and get there by following a very concise plan and delivery. And then measure that all the way along through the implementation process, and certainly at the end of your transformation journey.
Absolutely. We could probably spend hours on all of the things that you just said when it comes to moving through a successful project. First, I want to talk a little bit about some industry trends, because that's a big piece of the 2023 report, is talking about what are we looking like as far as technology implementation, digital transformation, software implementation, all of those different pieces. What will that look like kind of in the enterprise area in 2020-30? So I think that's an interesting take, because everyone has different opinions on that. So I'm going to start with Wayne on this one. When it comes to, what do you think is going to be the number one trend when it comes to digital transformation in 2020, in the 2020s moving into 2030?
I think there's going to be a shift away from just going and shopping and buying a brand, a software brand as such. I think people are starting to see that, there's a bit more to transformation than just installing another brand sort of thing, or creating an update. It's more than that. And I think that's where people are going to start to take a step back and have a look at what they really want, or what they need to do and change in their business. Because at the moment, probably, if you look at some businesses, they are probably in a space that is really difficult. You look at business climates across the world, quite difficult. Everything's a challenge. And so, the idea of putting technology in to solve that is a good idea, but at the end of the day, we know it doesn't solve it. And I think that people are starting to wise up on that and starting to go, let's look a bit deeper. Let's see what we really need to be able to do. And that seems to be a trend that we're seeing in our area.
Absolutely. And Eric, what about those emerging technologies? How are businesses going to prepare to have things like AI, predictive analytics, those types of different pieces kind of within their strategies for technology implementation?
There's always the aspiration to do AI and machine learning, but the one thing that many people forget is the fact that you need consistency. And if we look at most businesses that we work in, we find that they are the least consistent in the way they operate, and that's usually evolved over many years. And so to try and put in AI or leverage machine learning, those sorts of things, it's about going back to getting a consistent process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we lost Wayne in the Aussie cloud because it's so late there. He's frozen. But so let's hear from kind of the rest of our panelists. We'll start with you, Eric, when it comes to those different types of technologies, or what you've been seeing in this space when it comes to industry trends.
So I guess I have sort of a split opinion on this. I mean, on one hand, you have sort of your basic automation technologies like GL and accounting and inventory management and sort of your base technology that you need to run your business. And companies struggle so much even just with that base technology that, you know, to now take on AI, machine learning, and look at some of these more emerging technologies, that's even more difficult for organizations to tackle. But at the same time, those newer technologies are the things that are providing capabilities that are truly groundbreaking and, you know, provide that ability to optimize benefits realization, like Wayne said, and to improve the business model, like Clifford and Greg said. So, you know, that's sort of what companies have to do is yes, there's great technologies out there, and technology is changing a lot faster than most organizations are capable of changing. So you really have to sort of find the right pace for your organization on how quickly you adopt some of these new technologies, and make sure that you at least get that base foundational stuff figured out first, so that you can really take full advantage of some of these more emerging technologies.
Yeah.
Well said.
And if I can, yeah, Colin, I think what's also interesting to add to that, you know, so clearly there's some technologies that are taking shape and getting a higher rate of adoption at a quicker pace than others. You know, cloud, of course, is certainly one. But I think what's also interesting is some of the associated trends. You know, so who's deploying these technologies within the organization, and what is the kind of base to which they're being deployed? And increasingly, these types of technology are deployed within the broader ecosystem and not just within the organization. So there's a lot of collaboration with other value creators or supply chains or whatever, customers, whatever. So it's increasingly being deployed in the broader ecosystem, I think, is important. And I think another very interesting trend is that it's, to a much less extent, is it being deployed by the formal hierarchical IT department within the organization. We're seeing a lot more shadow IT, so-called shadow IT, lots of technologies being deployed by whether it's retail, marketing. And that to me is also a very interesting trend, because to some extent, one sees the IT department losing control over these so-called new digital emerging technologies, and that slack being picked up by other capabilities within the organization. So I think the technology trend is interesting, but how they're being deployed, who's deploying them, and to where they're being deployed is quite an interesting trend as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking forward to kind of unpacking that kind of internal competencies. I'm going to turn back to the audience just real quick so we can talk about our global saturation here. We have Australia, we have Sam Graham from Spain, we have the United States here, our representation from Colorado. So a true global audience. I'm going to put up a comment question from Chris Simmons on LinkedIn. And Greg, I feel like this one is written for you. So I'm going to ask you to kind of go ahead and read it. He said, sometimes companies do not know what their current systems can produce. Sometimes it doesn't mean the purchase of a new technology. So as someone that manages our front lines from a client perspective, I'd really love your feedback on this thought/question, Greg.
You know, this is a very insightful comment. The fact that you're looking at a digital transformation for the organization doesn't necessarily mean that you take everything that you've had that has been working well and eliminate it or replace it. It means taking those custom applications, those systems that really make your business, and integrate those with the new technologies. So you may find that this is a hybrid solution. And one of the things that has really emerged over the last decade is the integration technologies. So the platforms being cloud-based actually allow for a lot more integration with legacy systems, with other ancillary applications and solutions that really help you in terms of your overall operational standards and go forward. So again, getting back to that preparation of the organization, the strategy, and the phase zero, understanding exactly what you need to keep, what you need to preserve and go forward with as a new system is the overall phase zero approach. Mm-hmm. So I think that I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. I think that's great. And we really need to build out more of that phase zero understanding, because it is truly the most fundamental piece to set you up for success. So moving into kind of talking through these trends, we've seen a lot of conversation in the marketplace regarding best of breed systems. So a specialized system, a supply chain management, warehouse management versus a full ERP system. So I want to do, again, a round robin style to say, is it going to be best of breed or a full ERP suite moving into 2023? So Wayne, let's start with you.
I think that it's going to be a best of breed. It seems to be one of those areas that people are looking for, because there are failings in it trying to put a single ERP platform in. I probably don't tend to agree with that fully, but I see a lot of companies are wanting to go that way, where they actually want to get something that's specialized and suits their needs and really is focused. The challenge you have is trying to bring the two together and get them to work effectively. And that's I think that's the bit, as people actually embark on that journey, that's the challenge they'll face, is trying to get two different systems actually working seamlessly together. So it's I think it's a bit of a mix, but I think people are heading towards best of breed.
Good job, Wayne, not saying it depends, because I was about to start, some sort of drinking game, whether you're working on hydration, coffee, or you're enjoying a beverage in the Aussie area late at night. But good one. So let's go to our hashtag It Depends King. Eric, what are we going to see in the marketplace and best of breed versus full ERP?
Well, now you preempted my answer. I can't say that now. I can't say what I was really going to say.
You know me. I like to mix it up.
Well, I see this whole, unified single ERP versus best of breed debate. I see that a lot like politics. It's like, I think a lot of us, we all have opinions on that. Some of us have really strong opinions, but it's sort of like, it's never going to I don't think it'll ever get settled. It's the pendulum might swing a little bit back and forth, across the spectrum. But I think what you see in the marketplace, which is actually a pretty healthy thing, is you have sort of the unified single ERP vendors that are trying to be, for lack of a better word, they're trying to be everything to everyone. They're trying to provide capabilities that integrate cross industries and cross-functional workflows and things like that. And there's a lot of value in that. And there's a lot of companies that do want that. But given the fact that ERP systems can't be everything to everyone, and there's always going to be vulnerabilities and weaknesses within that model, you're going to get upstart vendors that are going to come attack those vulnerabilities and provide something better, in certain pieces of a unified ERP. So you look at companies like Salesforce on the CRM side or Workday on the human capital management side. That's exactly how those companies became so prominent, is because they went after the vulnerabilities of ERP systems. Salesforce said, we can provide a better CRM system, and Workday said, we can provide a better human capital management solution than most big ERP vendors. And so you see this tension and constant swinging of the pendulum in the market, where for all the advances that ERP makes, there's always going to be vulnerabilities and weaknesses within that model. You're going to have other software vendors that come in and try and attack that and provide a better mousetrap. And so I think what it does, is it provides a lot of options for organizations. So the good news is you have a lot of options. You don't have to, pick just one size fits all model. You could have a hybrid. You could pick single ERP. You could go with best of breed. A lot of it just depends on. Oh, sorry, I just accidentally said it. I was trying really hard not to say it depends, but a lot of it depends on.
I just.
It was so hard for me to not say it depends in that entire response. But anyway, so it does depend, though. It depends on what your strategy is and what you're trying to accomplish. But the good news is I think there's always going to be lots of options. And I think that pendulum is going to always swing back and forth between the preferred model for organizations.
Absolutely. And we say it depends a lot here at Third Stage because of that business advocacy. That's what we come into the room to do, because we are so focused on making our client community successful. So ITs are specifically our executives, because I have that audience to do so when it comes to saying depends. But it truly is kind of our model.
We're here with a panel talking about lessons from our 2023 digital transformation report. We have a lot more to cover. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 78. We're here having a panel discussion that Kyler facilitated with some of our leaders at the company, talking about the 2023 Digital Transformation Report.
I'm going to go to you, Clifford, and bring up it from Sam Graham, who I've said multiple times, I feel like you and Sam would be really good friends. Sam is a main audience contributor and a guest blogger for us, and I'm kind of going to evolve this to the conversation topic. So making companies more efficient doesn't necessarily making them more effective. So in this best of breed ERP argument, when we talk about what Eric just mentioned, the Workdays, the Salesforce of the world, that might make you more efficient in that specific area of the business, but does that make you more effective in building ROI and business value when it comes to the overall enterprise?
Yes, it touches on a number of points, Carla, and let me first say that I think the interesting thing when one looks at organizations that are primarily best of breed versus single monolithic type ERP, I find it fascinating that they have often not arrived there through an informed ERP or digital transformation strategy. You know, it kind of happened a little bit by default very often, and that's quite interesting. And in many instances, it talks to the type of decision making and governance model that one has, specifically in broader or complex organizations. So I certainly think there's a little bit more science needed, a little bit, one has to start with that digital transformation strategy and ensure that you understand why you're embarking on a particular route, whether that might be best, which will suit certain organizations, or suit certain subsidiaries within an organization, or certain parts of an organization, that, the more customer facing versus the more back office commodity type business processes. But it's often not as a result of an informed strategy. So I think there's a great opportunity to assist organizations in making those types of decisions. In terms of the efficiency, effectiveness thing, absolutely comes back to the business benefit realization debate that we started the session with. And I do find that it's a little bit sad, but more often than not, where the organizations become more efficient and more effective, it's often by default rather than by design. We start off with these grand ideas in the business case, very comprehensive, wanting to drive out certain qualitative benefits, both efficiency and effectiveness. And often organizations are just lucky to go live and just satisfied that they've actually taken this project live. And then they kind of rest on their laurels and declare victory. And we never really get to unpack those benefits, whether it's efficiency or effectiveness type benefits. So I think lots of scope to assist organizations actually achieve either of those benefits.
Absolutely. Definitely well said on the benefits realization. Greg, I'm going to do a question for you, again, more of a comment here. So Sunny from our ASSI area says ERP is a dinosaur. Changing your ERP is not necessarily digitizing your transformation journey. My view is API and the power of API is what brings the transformation. You kind of talked about the integration piece and that technology coming and emerging in the marketplace. So what's your thoughts on Sunny's comment?
Sunny, I think we're kindred spirits here. I believe that, ERP has been enterprise resource planning, right? ERP is evolved into really enterprise operations. And enterprise operations have to be fully integrated. It's not the efficiency or the gains that you're going to get from a new system. It really is having the data sources from your entire enterprise being able to work together so that you can make decisions about how the business needs to move forward, so that you can take advantage of some of the the process automation that you create with your enterprise operations. And enterprise operations and ERP are surrounded by ancillary applications and systems. And of course, those need to be connected by APIs, by cloud-to-cloud connection, by the entire interoperability platform that you create as you go forward with the digital transformation. And I think that's why the end goal has to be all of your systems working together in an efficient manner to move the organization forward and reap the rewards of that expected return on investment. Otherwise, why are people going to invest in this type of transition and transformation?
Absolutely. So well said. And that brings me kind of to my next topic of why do digital transformations fail? And we know that this can be some of the most expensive failures. It can put small to mid-sized businesses in bankruptcy. It has a huge impact if you are not successful in implementing the technology you purchased, and then the user adoption phase, right? That additional phase on the end to make sure you're maximizing business value. So I'm going to do another lightning round with our panel here in 3 words or less, which we'll make a soft boundary there, right? Why do digital transformations fail? What is that number one reason? So let's start with you, Eric.
I would say internal misalignment would be a top reason why. So the organization isn't aligned on what it is they're trying to accomplish with the transformation. It doesn't align with their overall corporate goals and objectives. The team isn't heading in the same direction. There isn't clarity on what it is we expect from this project. Too often it's sort of a project that just gets delegated or relegated to lower levels of the organization to go solve a modernization of technology sort of problem. And the focus ends up being on just replacing technology without a clear vision of what it is we really want to get out of that. So I think that lack of clarity and alignment is really the root cause for a lot of other problems that stem from that. So you could point to 20 other problems that happen during a project. A lot of it traces back to that fact that you're not aligned as a team.
Misalignment. All right, Wayne, you got to pick something else. What's your choice when it comes to main failure point?
But mine is failure to recognize you need to change. It's probably more than 3 words, but many organizations think that a great strategy and technology is the perfect mix and forget that people have to actually use the system, and change is a key component of that. And so that's I think is one of the big areas that causes failures.
Excellent. So we have misalignment, we have change. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Lack of preparedness as an organization. It's getting back to the whole phase 0 idea. It's getting back to the understanding your strategy before you ever get into selecting the technology piece, making sure that your people are all in sync with moving forward together, that you have executive alignment in terms of what you're going to do. Importantly, you have a budget that you understand what you want to achieve as your end goal. And I think that's where people don't start as a digital transformation strategy. They start as a technology change. So,
absolutely. Clifford, last but certainly not least, what are your thoughts on why transformations fail?
I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to say the same thing as Eric, but I'm going to say it differently. I think failure to define success. And And I think it's important because, and it's not just about failure to define success and obviously align with the different stakeholder groups within the organization as to what constitutes success. But what I find interesting as well, Kyla, and to the panel, is the timing of measuring the success. The worst time to do it is when it's in the first 2-3 months post-deployment or post-go-live of this massive organizational transformation project. Absolutely, with the best will in the world and the best change management strategy, approach, and capabilities, the organization is going to go through some disruption. People have new roles, new technologies, new ways of working. And many organizations, for some odd reason, decide that's the best time to decide whether we've been successful or not. One has to go through that little bit of a trough and then stabilize the new environment, new business-enabled or technology-enabled environment, and then start to optimize it and measure the benefits. But you have to first go through that stabilization phase. So I think aligning on business benefits and then deciding at what point in this life cycle do we actually decide to now take a rain check on whether we've achieved those benefits or not. It cannot be within a week after we've deployed this massive new technologies in the organization.
That's really well said, Clifford. And our 2023 report that we're talking about today has our main metrics that you do measure success, or how to set up your KPIs to understand if your project is successful. So let's talk about that a little bit. So Eric, what are some main KPIs or metrics that you should be measuring, and when should you be taking that measurement, to Clifford's point, to quantify the success of your digital transformation?
Sure. So there's certainly your sort of baseline metrics that most organizations are focused on, which is, to implement on time, on budget, that sort of thing. And that's where, a lot of organizations focus on those metrics. But what I'd say to that, though, is too often they focus on those metrics without fully understanding what the long-term implications are. So in other words, they focus on optimizing the time and cost to deploy technology, but they don't think about what the real time and cost and the impact of the overall deployment is. So in other words, you can minimize your implementation costs, but create more operational problems that cost you a lot more than the money you saved on, cutting your cost on the implementation. So it's a little bit misleading or misguided in terms of how organizations focus on it, but most organizations do focus on time and cost. But even more important, back to what Clifford and the others have mentioned, is that you really have to define the business value you want to get out of this. So what, for example, if you're deploying technology that could potentially help you increase revenue, let's define how are we going to change our business model and our processes and the way we're organized, and how are we going to use this new technology to increase revenue, and what is that revenue metric we want to hit, and how are we going to do that? Who's going to be accountable for it? How are we going to get the visibility into that? How are we going to need to change processes and people's jobs to use this technology in a better way to increase revenue? So it's not just setting the metric, it's also defining how we're going to get there. Too often organizations will do more of an academic exercise early in the project. They'll say, well, if we put in new technology, we can increase revenue by 10%, let's say, per year. And they put that in the business case. It helps justify the decision. The board approves the project, and no one ever looks at that metric again. And what you really need to do is say, okay, if we want to increase revenue 10%, let's put together a benefits realization plan of how we're going to do that. And it's going to be a lot more than just putting new technology in place. We're going to have to figure out how we change our processes in the organization. So, rather than give you specific metrics that organizations should look at, what I could say is organizations need to define those metrics that are most important to them. Why are you doing this project? What is it you want to get out of it? And how are you going to measure that going forward? And a lot of times it's revenue based. A lot of time it's reduction of cost. So, reducing inventory or reducing cycle times, that sort of thing, better visibility into planning. And that, there's a lot of different metrics like that may be more or less relevant depending on what your goals and objectives are as an organization.
Absolutely. Certainly well said. That needs to be unique to the organization. And I'm going to bring up this comment here and go to Greg, because we're talking about that phase 0 concept again. So digital transformations fail because the phase 0 is either not completed or does not achieve alignment and vision. So I'm going to evolve this to match kind of our conversation. Greg, in that phase 0, how do you set those KPIs? How do you look at the measurement for success or that benefits realization plan, as Eric just mentioned? What does that look like in that phase 0 approach?
This comment really goes back to everything that we've been talking about in terms of preparation for the organization. And really, there are two things that are linked to the return on investment and when and where that's measured. And one of those is the total cost of ownership. So as you're going into kind of the planning phase, you're going into the pre-plan, let's call it that, in phase 0. You really need to look at what the organization is going to achieve from bottom line cost savings, as Eric pointed out, or increased revenue, or the metrics that you're going to get as you come through the digital transformation journey. And that can be quantified as a business model, a total cost of ownership over the next 1 year to 5 to 10 years in terms of your overall journey. And then that can be equated to benchmark achievement of those metrics all the way along. And so the TCO actually generates the ROI at the end of the digital transformation that you've decided on. And that requires a very comprehensive phase 0 and approach to preparedness of the organization to move forward.
Absolutely. I think that's very well said. And again, some great insight in that 2023 report. It is, if you're just joining us, it is in the description for each one of our live streams today, and also at thirdstage-consulting.com in our thought leadership guides and reports. So definitely be sure to check that out, because what Greg's saying here and that ROI of digital transformation, all of that really dense content and valuable content is involved in there. So I want to talk a little bit about what you touched on, Greg, and talk about specifically cloud. Cloud is a huge trend. A lot of what we're seeing in the digital transformation space is migrating to a cloud. We talked to Eric, you talked to Lisa Pope earlier this week, the president of Epicor, and what that looks like as far as cloud migration from a vendor standpoint. So I want to talk about unpopular opinions, because that's my favorite thing to do. So I'm going to go to you first, Clifford. Is cloud less expensive or more expensive for different organizations?
Are we still subject to the rule that we're not allowed to say it depends?
Well, Eric's fans are roasting me on the internet, so I'm not
Eric's done away with that already, so.
So I'm not canceled, but you can say it depends. I'll allow it. Okay.
No, that's fine, Carla. So it does often come down to how one defines expensive, because some organizations purely put all their technology deployment and decision making within a capital type of budget. Some are happy to go for more OPEX or subscription based, which of course cloud SaaS type solutions lend themselves to. And that's often sometimes easier to get approved, because it doesn't require the same level of authority or the same depth of business case or justification. So once again, I don't think it's always based off an informed decision as to how organizations end up, with either on-premise or something in the cloud, or a particular multi or single tenant SaaS type model. Certainly we know that the vendors are pushing cloud, and I do think that it comes down to what do you as an organization want, and what trade-offs are you willing to make from a cost perspective. So if we do want a high degree of flexibility, we have concerns about data security, as many organizations do, and we prefer our software and our data to be sitting on a server in our basement. It kind of feels more comforting and we have more control over it. Even if that's a little bit more expensive, as it often is these days, I do find that organizations will tend to gravitate towards that type of decision, even though it may be a little bit more expensive. So I think a lot of these decisions are being made for other reasons, often sometimes emotional reasons, and just an inability to change rather than based on purely, the TCO business case, if you want. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And so, Eric, what's your reaction to that in thinking through the decision making around choosing a cloud solution, choosing a hybrid solution, and unpacking or decoding a vendor pushing you into that new system? Is that for your benefit or theirs? How do you tell?
Well, it's definitely for their benefit. So, I mean, you have to recognize that, that they will benefit from you moving to the cloud. And the dynamic in the industry that drives a lot of this cloud adoption is not only because there are clear advantages and benefits to moving to the cloud, but arguably more importantly, because the vendors make higher margins and more steady, predictable revenue from cloud solutions than they do on premise. And that's what investors want. And that's what investors are rewarding the software vendors for. So there's a clear bias in the industry toward moving to the cloud, and that percolates or kind of cascades throughout the industry, and that the vendors then start commissioning Gartner and Forrester and industry analysts to put out all these reports about how great the cloud is and how everyone should move to the cloud. And so it becomes kind of like common perception that cloud is better. And it could be. I mean, there are definite advantages, but there's a cost to the cloud too. It's a cost that never goes away. Typically, it's a higher annual cost that you're paying to the vendors. Excuse me, I have very bad allergies today, so I apologize for the constant coughing here. But so that bias in the industry has really driven a lot of the sort of the blinders of what's the real downside in the dark side of the cloud, and a lot of organizations don't recognize that. For a lot of organizations, I would say it's actually going to cost you more to move to the cloud. Or at best case scenario, you're just shifting costs from internal costs that you're not maintaining anymore. You're just shifting those costs over to a vendor, and you're not really saving money. So when vendors come out and say you're going to save all this money in the cloud, I think it's disingenuous at best. Shifting gears, though, there is definite value to the cloud. I mean, there's advantages, there's efficiency gains, there's the lack of technical debt, the fact that you have constant R&D that's constantly improving and making the technology better that you didn't have before. So there's value there, but the cost is generally going to be higher than a lot of organizations think.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eric Kimberling is physically allergic to vendor bias, is what I'm hearing in that overall conversation.
Yes, it just coincided with this discussion.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely. So Wayne, you are a process efficiency expert. You do a lot in our defining an operating model, process mining, those types of different pieces. So what are your thoughts on the efficiency piece of processes in cloud technology?
I think it's becoming more and more important to actually have good process and understand your processes and get consistency of processes. And when you look at a SaaS or a cloud type option, that's what they're looking for, is that consistency. That vendors are preferring not to have customizations because to maintain that over the long term is much harder for them to do. And part of that ongoing versioning and updates is a preference on their behalf on why cloud is important for them. Not necessarily you as a client, they sell it as a benefit, but that's one of the things that is a benefit to them. And process and having standardized, consistent process is what that's based on. There's some organizations that want to stay as they always have, heavily customized, and that flies in the face of where a lot of software vendors are going, because if you look in the SAP world, they're sort of saying we want to end support on these heavily customized type options and try and push people into more of the cloud SaaS type options, because it's cheaper for them to maintain and keep updated with that. So yeah, that's what you sort of see. But the process piece is becoming more and more important, because if you don't actually attend to your processes, your effectiveness of a new deployment in a SaaS option becomes quite restricted. And that's a lot of people are learning that when it comes to deploying into new platforms. And that's where a lot of failures are starting to happen in that space.
Absolutely. And Greg, as you are often our North Star when it comes to strategic partnership and vendor communication, you keep us kind of level set. What do you see as far as vendors' overall perspective of pushing users into the cloud? Is that really for their benefit, or is it for the actual client's benefit as kind of our main stakeholder in that conversation?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because I take a little bit different perspective on this. I think that the vendors are pushing us in a direction that we want to go. The advent, the multi-tenant cloud environment. Remember the old on-premise upgrade cycles that happened every 2 to 5 years that cost $400,000 or $500,000, $1 million to go forward with? Think about continual optimization of those older applications. The new continual update of the multi-tenant cloud environment really sets you up for the next decade. So instead of implementing a software system that you're going to be using for the next 5 years, that you're going to have possibly another complete organization in 5 years with things changing. As change happens, the new cloud systems, the new multi-tenant cloud systems especially, can adapt to that change. And the integration is one of the questions that came across earlier with APIs going back and forth between cloud environments. It is entirely flexible and interoperable to have your digital transformation include the entire system going forward with data unified on a single platform. And that's the promise of the new cloud technologies.
Absolutely. And I think that I'll just mention to our audience, this is my favorite part about working with the executives at Third Stage, is there are many different opinions. And that's the point. That's what makes us really valuable to our clients, is we go in with all of these different opportunities to do what's best for them in many different phases. So I just want to kind of point that out, is the years of experience that comes with this team, is the ability to speak to what's going to bring the most value to our clients.
We're here with a panel talking about lessons from our 2023 digital transformation report. We have a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 78. We're here having a panel discussion that Kyler facilitated with some of our leaders at the company, talking about the 2023 Digital Transformation Report.
So Sam Graham has an interesting question here, and I'm actually going to go to you with this, Wayne. So when vendors say that their system is based on best practices, should we believe them? And the reason that I'm going to ask this question to Wayne is because he was one of our keynote speakers at our APAC regional digital stratosphere, which again, you can find in our events section on our website, that replay. And we had a ton of dialogue from our APAC region specifically around vendor best practice. Some really, really interesting insight there from that community. So Wayne, I'm hoping that you could kind of bring that to life here in this question from Sam.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought that a software vendor could actually give you best practice. Yes, probably on their terms, and for actually having a streamlined process of how you actually transact within the system. Best practice, consistent practice is yes, they probably could have that. But does it really relate to how an organization's best practice is? I I don't believe that's the case. And I think that's where the myth that is sold often is that if we just put technology in, we'll have best practice. And unless we actually are doing best practice ourselves in those processes that don't actually always are integrated with the technology, then the best practice in technology won't be any better than just an average practice as such. So.
Absolutely. And Clifford gets the actual award for top buzzword of 2022 here with professional skepticism, which I now say in every conversation I have daily. So this kind of builds on that idea. And Clifford, a lot of your content around system integrators and their relationship with a digital transformation. So can you kind of speak to that, build on Wayne?
Yes, no, I fully agree with Wayne, and one also has to ask the question, what constitutes best practice in terms of, because it really does come down to where you're at as an organization and in which areas you're wanting to improve and mature. Certainly, one cannot do it across all business domains. I think one has to be selective, and sometimes that best practice may well come from inside the organization, as to how can we improve. It may well come from some type of reference model with industry reference model. So I think personally, clients need to have the choice to interrogate what the vendor's bringing along in terms of their best practices, what is industry best practices, and what are their own people saying, where are the areas that we need to close the gap, where we need to improve, and more often than not, a combination of those three, in my view.
Absolutely. And Eric, I see you nodding, ready to enter this conversation. So what are your thoughts on those best practices? And before your answer, I'll just remind the audience that our 2023 report, which we're talking about here, has our best practices that we've pulled out, not only from vendors, but also from our own proven client experience. So with that, Eric, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Clifford said it really well. I totally agree with everything he just said and what the group has said so far about best practices. I think, the key to what Clifford just said is that that resonated with me is really just selectively, deliberately determining where you're going to leverage quote unquote vendor best practices. And I use quotes because who's to define what a best practice is really? I mean, and B, is that best practice really suitable for you as an organization? So there's going to be certain parts of your organization that are certainly going to benefit from those software best practices, but there's also going to be parts of your organization where those best practices aren't relevant, or they're not good enough, or it just doesn't fit your goals and objectives. In those cases, you may not want to use those best practices. You may want to Clifford's point, develop your own best practices or to leverage your own internal best practices. And maybe, and God forbid, I know everyone hates to hear this, but maybe you need to customize the software, change the software to fit your business and that competitive advantage. And so I think you have to sort of separate your business processes and capabilities into two buckets. One bucket is these are sort of our more commodity-based business processes that, yes, we want to leverage whatever capabilities the software can bring to us. And then there's a bucket over here that's more the competitive differentiators, the things that our customers interact with, the way the customers interact with us, or the things that allow us to go to market faster and produce products faster, whatever the case may be. Those areas are where you're really going to want to dial in on your own internal best practices, define what those business processes should look like, then figure out how the technology fits in within that, rather than just leveraging software best practices.
Absolutely. And that customization piece, Greg, I'm going to bring up this comment because it kind of goes off of your last talk track. But I want to specifically talk about the best practice of the post go live adoption. You talk a lot about how you help our clients make sure that they are realizing the overall ROI and maximizing business value by those post go live. So this comment, many of the multi-tenant cloud applications focus on user experience in addition to effectiveness and efficiency. The third E of experience also helps drive the post go live adoption. So when we're talking about best practices, how do you ensure that when kind of the vendor talks about best practices, that's actually realized by the client?
Well, actually, I think that goes back to the organization being on board with the entire journey. that you're going forward with. So if you don't have the organization, the executive level on down involved in the implementation of the new technology, of the new system, they're not going to have the knowledge of the system, the use, their own applied best practices internally as an organization, and they're going to start reverting to old practices and not really adopt the new system in the way that it's intended. So it's very important that you have the entire organization moving forward under one banner, right? And that is really the secret, the key to user adoption at the end of the journey, and satisfaction with the system that you've implemented all the way along.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us to kind of our final thought here when it comes to the digital transformation report and those keys to success. So I want to go around and kind of finish this out, since we're up against the top of the hour, about what is the key takeaway in your opinion from this report, and what would be the recommendation for our audience here if you had to pick one part of the report to focus on. And Wayne, let's start with you.
I think the report actually gets people to think. So there's a number of different steps there, and it sort of articulates those out. And so the areas in my mind are those areas where you actually start to prepare and think about what you're doing, understanding what strategy is, and those what it means for engagement and how all of that works. And I think that's the key thing I see from the report. It helps people understand there's more to it than just going out and buying a software and implementing. And I think that's where the report really adds value.
Absolutely. That perspective is so important. What about you, Clifford? What are some of the key takeaways that you take from this kind of overarching report on transformations in 2023?
Yeah, I would encourage our participants and listeners on the call to focus on the failures, because they seem to be perennial. We seem to have from one report to the next, and I think, Kyle, if we'd done a bit of an exercise and went back to this report, or similar ones from 5-10 years ago, we're probably going to find a lot of similarity, and organizations for some other reason just seemingly fail to learn that and apply those lessons. So really understand those failures and make sure that you're continuously interrogating and reflecting that you're going down those rabbit holes and you're falling into those traps, because we seem to be unable to shake them and learn from them. And it's always sad to see when organizations make those same mistakes over and again, ending in failure. So really understand those reasons for failures and ensure that that's not happening to you as you step through this journey.
Absolutely. And both Wayne and Eric are expert witnesses when it comes to working on our failure cases. When they do get to that point, we do have that content in the 2023 report that talks about how to kind of avoid that, because we never obviously want you to get there. But Greg, some final thoughts on the best part of this report?
I'm going to tag on to Clifford a little bit. I love the failure discussion, but not because of the failures. It's really because people are looking for an idea about what it's going to cost me. What is the organization going to experience? We've got a whole section in the report that talks about what you can expect in terms of cost, in terms of organizational change, the disruption to the organization, and avoiding the pitfalls. And at the risk of repeating what Clifford, Wayne, and Eric are all saying, that is a very important part of the report in terms of learning.
Absolutely. And Eric, as the main thought leader behind this report, what specifically about the 2023 report are you excited to share with our community here?
Well, in addition to what Clifford and Greg said about the, just sort of the lessons learned and the best practices behind implementation, and Wayne mentioned some of that as well. I think the other value, or the other big thing that I like about the report, is just that it shows organizations, or it's meant to show organizations, you have a lot of different choices and options and directions and paths you can go down with your digital transformation. We've talked about a lot of those decisions, cloud versus on-premise and single ERP versus best of breed, all that stuff. We do a lot of in that report. In addition to some of the implementation best practices, we also talk about some of the software comparisons, our independent and agnostic reviews, if you will, of these different options and types of systems and vendors in the marketplace. And I think what it does is it really showcases and highlights the fact that organizations have a lot of different options. There's no one right answer for any given organization, and you need to really have a clearly defined digital strategy and roadmap to leverage selectively the best technology or technologies and corresponding business improvements that are going to go along with that. That combined with the readiness and the preparation that Greg talked a lot about, those two things combined, I think, are really going to set organizations up for success. And those are some of the lessons we wanted to impart in this report. All right. Thank you for that panel discussion. That was a great discussion. A lot of good lessons there. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll share some of those lessons and takeaways from that conversation. But first, we'll take that break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings, and the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 78. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. And Kyler, we just had this great discussion with the panel about the 2023 Digital Transformation Report, which, again, you can download via the link in the description for this podcast. But what were some of your takeaways from that conversation?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more I wanted to get to. And I just want everyone to take a minute to go follow those stakeholders on LinkedIn. When we talk about Clifford Martin, Wayne Holtham, Greg Benton, and obviously Eric Kimberling, but they put out thought leadership so many times a day that if you are going through a transformation, in addition to the 2023 report, which is more of a static asset, they put out all of our thought leadership as well. So highly recommend leveraging their experience in this area. So one thing that we didn't get to that I kind of want to talk about in conjunction with what we've talked about on this specific episode is what it is like to be an expert witness, specifically in the lens that both you and Wayne, our expert witnesses for our clients. But the reason we put out all of this thought leadership, these top 10 lists, these best practices to digital transformation is to avoid failure, like we just talked about. So what does it look like to be an expert witness involved in sometimes these multi-million-dollar digital transformation failures? And how can you leverage assets like the 2023 transformation report to avoid those types of expert witness cases that are very expensive?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because one thing I always say to our new clients that are just starting out, they're not experiencing any sort of failure yet, is one thing I'll say is, I hope you never have to hire us to be an expert witness. We'd much rather you hire us early on to do the digital strategy type work and the software selection and helping them with the implementation. It's actually a lot cheaper. We make less money on those projects, but it's a lot less painful. It's a lot cheaper for the client if to have that sort of help up front versus needing an expert later. But to answer your question, as far as what it's like to be an expert witness or what that entails, It just, first of all, there's a lot of credibility that you have to establish to become an expert witness. So attorneys and judges and juries, arbitrators, whoever might be involved in a lawsuit, they need to know that you know what you're talking about and that you're credible. So that's first and foremost what you need. And the beauty of our business and sort of my role in our business is that we are technology agnostic. And because we're not affiliated with any software vendors, we are extremely credible. So we're not in there just towing the company line, talking about how great technology is or how great a certain vendor is. We're objective and we don't really care. I mean, we just state what we think, as you may have noticed if you've watched any of our content over any amount of time. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I've been involved in probably 30 or 35 different cases throughout the world, and testified in a handful of those. Most of them end up settling before you ever get to trial, but the testimony is super interesting because you have to explain what happened, and you have to explain it in a way that a judge and a jury and lay people would understand. And I think that's why I'm getting better over time at taking complex ideas and putting them into a YouTube video, is partly because I'm an expert witness. I have to do that to be able to be a good expert. And so those are just a couple things, and then of course having the experience with expert witness cases helps. And so it kind of snowballs over time. The more experience you get, the more in demand you are because you've done so many cases. Wayne has done, I think, 2 or 3 different expert witness cases. So he's maybe earlier in the process with that than I am, although he has, ironically, he has more experience than me. And you could make a pretty strong argument that he's more qualified than me, but I've just done more expert witness stuff. And that's the big differentiator for now. We're trying to change that, obviously. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your questions, but that's sort of what an expert witness does, and then, or kind of what it means to be an expert witness. But the main thing is you just have to be able to analyze these cases and explain what happened, make sure people understand it, and, establish your credibility along the way.
Absolutely. That's super interesting. And just the fact that, we're in that space, I think is incredibly compelling as far as what that can actually turn into when you don't forward think your strategies, bring in those agnostic advocates. But so you started this annual report even before I joined the Third Stage team. So can you kind of speak to why you saw the need for it in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, I actually started doing something similar probably about 15 years ago at my previous company. And just really, at the time, and this thought process has continued until now, is I just felt like there wasn't enough objective, quantitative views of the world for people to turn to when they're planning for a digital transformation. In other words, I didn't want to. I feel like there's plenty of marketing collateral out there, plenty of sales collateral out there that you can find about how great technology is or how great vendor A, B, or C is. But that's all sales messaging. And of course, you're going to get one side of the story. And then if you go to Gartner or Forrester or one of the big industry analyst firms, you're going to get the same sort of thing. You're going to get reports that were commissioned by the same software vendors that are putting out the sales messaging on their side of the fence. So I just really wanted to have more of a, I think a lot of people would consider it disruptive, but it wasn't necessarily meant to be disruptive. It was meant to just be an honest view of this is what we see. And guess what? It doesn't necessarily align 100% with what the industry analysts and the software vendors are saying, because we're not trying to sell software. So we have no dog in the fight. We just want to sort of state what's really happening. And so that was really the impetus for us, was to have that technology agnostic and that technology agnostic view of the market. But then it evolved over time. Just in the last couple of years, we started not just looking at quantitative information, but then doing qualitative comparisons of different software systems out there, sort of in different settings, different verticals. What are the best systems for different scenarios or different situations? And so that's sort of, you'll see that reflected more and more on this year's report for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time to kind of talk through some of that with us. To our audience, I've already gotten some great feedback via LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me via email, which will be linked below as well. If you have any feedback on our report, we always love to hear from you, obviously. But as a reminder, you can head to our website in our thought leadership section, guides and reports. Those are where all of our reports lived, and you'll see the 2023 report in addition to being linked below and wherever you're viewing today. So please take a minute, download it, use it as a checklist to ensure that you set yourself up for success with any sort of technology implementation or digital transformation.
Yeah. Be sure to download it, and I would love to hear your feedback too. Any feedback you have on that or questions you have, you can reach out to either of us on that. So I want to thank you for helping us with another great episode, Kyler, and thank you to our other guests for being here today, and to our audience for the great participation and comments and questions along the way. So thank you, everyone. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms. So be sure to subscribe, leave us a review. Any comments you have is very helpful, and we read and take that stuff very seriously. So we appreciate that. Hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Take care.